When did your teacher call your house with devastating news? If I was your daughter, I wouldn't go to school tomorrow. I'd look into moving to another district. The voice said loud enough for me to hear. Why not? Who is this? My mom asked, confused. Just a teacher who's looking out. I can't tell her why, but she needs to go to school elsewhere. The line went dead before my mom could ask anything else. She immediately asked if anything had happened at school recently that I hadn't told her about. Anyone been bothering me or making threats? I told her everything was normal and I had no idea what that phone call was about. My mom said she didn't know either, but she was going to find out. She started texting other parents in our neighborhood, asking if they'd heard anything strange about the school. While she was typing furiously on her phone, I grabbed mine and called my best friend Georgia. She always knew all the gossip. Georgia answered on the second ring, sounding surprised to hear from me. I told her about the weird phone call and how a teacher said I shouldn't go to school anymore. There was a long pause before Georgia responded, and when she did, her voice sounded strange, almost like she was disappointed in me or something. Well, duh, it's because of the whiteboard. My stomach dropped even though I had no idea what she was talking about. I asked her what whiteboard and she made this sound like she couldn't believe I was asking. I thought you were avoiding everyone because of the whiteboard. I'm surprised you even called me. I practically yelled, asking what whiteboard she was talking about. Georgia sighed and said she'd send me the picture, but warned me it wasn't pretty. My phone buzzed with her text and I opened the image. It was a photo of a classroom whiteboard taken from the back of the room. Most of it had normal math equations, but in the top corner someone had written something in red marker. Alicia O'Brien, you're next. You have 72 hours. I showed my mom the phone and watched her face go from pale to bright red with anger. She jumped up from the couch and started pacing around the living room, muttering about lawsuits and police reports. She kept saying this was unacceptable and heads were going to roll. I'd never seen her this fired up about anything. Oh, hell no. We're calling the police, she said, reaching for her cell phone. But before she could even unlock it, we heard a car door slam outside. Through the front window, we could see a police cruiser parked in our driveway with its lights off. A uniformed officer was already walking up our front path. My mom and I looked at each other in confusion. How did they already know about the whiteboard threat? The doorbell rang and my mom rushed to answer it. The officer was young and looked serious as he showed his badge. He asked if he could come in and my mom dragged him inside. The officer stood in our living room with his hands on his belt, looking between me and my mom. He cleared his throat and pulled out a small notepad. Missy O'Brien, we have reports from multiple students that you may be a target due to your assault. I jumped up from the couch, ready to defend myself. Assault? I've never laid a finger on a person. The officer looked confused and said, Not you. Your mother. The officer flipped through his notepad and stopped at a page covered in messy handwriting. He looked up at my mom and cleared his throat again before reading from his notes. He said there was an incident at the PTA fundraiser 3 months ago involving my mom and another parent named Bridget Malhotra. Mom's whole body went stiff, and her face turned white as paper. The officer kept reading about how witnesses reported a shoving match over fundraising money near the dessert table. He said Bridget filed a report, but didn't press charges after the school asked both parties to let it go. Mom sank down onto the couch and put her head in her hands. I stared at her in shock because she'd never mentioned any fight or problem at the school events. The officer looked between us and said someone was probably using this old incident to threaten me as payback against my mom. He explained that revenge threats often target family members to cause maximum pain and fear. Mom's hands were shaking as she lifted her head, and tears started rolling down her cheeks. She kept saying sorry over and over while wiping her face with her sleeve. She told us it was such a stupid fight about who would handle the cash box at the fundraiser. Bridget had accused her of taking money, and Mom pushed her away when she got in her face. They both shoved each other before other parents pulled them apart. Mom thought it was over when Bridget didn't press charges, but now she realized Bridget had been planning this all along. The officer nodded and wrote more notes while Mom cried harder. He said they'd increase patrols around our house starting tonight, and suggested we might want to stay somewhere else if possible. He pulled out a business card and handed it to Mom with both hands like it was something important. He promised to have a detective assigned first thing in the morning to figure out who actually wrote the threat on the whiteboard. Mom took the card and thanked him while still crying and apologizing to me. The officer stood up and adjusted his belt before walking to the door. He turned back and told us to lock everything and call if we saw anything suspicious. After he left, Mom jumped up and went into full protective mode. She ran around the house checking every lock on every window and door. She pulled all the curtains closed so tight that no light could get through. Then she grabbed her phone and called Dad, who was away on a business trip in Chicago. I could hear her voice breaking as she explained everything about the threat and the fight she'd kept secret. Dad must have been yelling because Mom held the phone away from her ear. She kept saying she was sorry and that she'd handle it and protect me. While she paced around talking to Dad, I grabbed my phone and texted Georgia. I asked if she knew anything about someone named Bridget Malhotra, or if she had kids at our school. Georgia texted back immediately saying Bridget's nephew Logan was in my math class. My stomach dropped because that was the same room where the threat was written on the whiteboard. Georgia said Logan had been living with his aunt since his parents divorced last year. She started sending me screenshots from Logan's social media accounts. The posts were all angry rants about fake people getting what they deserve and how karma was coming. The post had started right after the PTA incident, which couldn't be a coincidence. In one photo, I could see his open pencil case on his desk with a red marker sitting right on top. Georgia kept sending more screenshots showing Logan posting cryptic threats and countdown posts. That night, I couldn't sleep at all and kept checking my phone every few minutes. Anonymous accounts started DMing me with countdown messages saying things like 71 hours left. Each notification made my heart race faster, and my hands get sweatier. Some messages just said TikTok over and over, which made me want to throw my phone across the room. I tried blocking the accounts, but new ones kept popping up with similar messages. Mom came into my room 3 times to check on me, and we both pretended I was sleeping. The next morning, Mom decided I should stay home from the school while the police investigated. She called in sick to work, and we sat together on the couch jumping at every car that passed. A delivery truck made us both duck down thinking someone was coming for us. We kept the TV on, but neither of us was actually watching it. At exactly 9 a.m., the doorbell rang and we saw another police car outside. Detective Carter showed his badge and Mom let him in immediately. He was older than the first officer with gray hair and a serious face. He sat down with a tablet and started asking detailed questions about the PTA incident. Mom had to go through every detail about who was there and what exactly happened with Bridget. He wanted to know about any other conflicts or problems we'd had with anyone recently. He confirmed that threatening messages were being traced, but most came from fake accounts using VPNs. He said Tech Crimes was working on it, but these things took time to track down properly. After taking our statements, the detective walked through our house doing a safety check. He suggested we install security cameras on all doors and keep everything locked at all times. He tested our locks and showed us weak spots where someone could potentially break in. He assigned a patrol car to drive by every hour, which made me feel slightly safer. But it also made me feel more like a target knowing we needed that much protection. About an hour after the detective left, Mom's phone rang with the school's main number showing on the screen. She put it on speaker, and the principal's voice filled our living room, sounding way too cheerful for the situation. He started talking about how these kinds of threats happen all the time and usually turn out to be nothing serious. He kept saying I should come back to the school tomorrow because missing class would only hurt my grades. Mom's face turned red and she started yelling about lawsuits and how the district better have good insurance if they let anything happen to me. The principal backtracked so fast it was almost funny, saying of course my safety was the top priority and I could take all the time I needed. After Mom hung up on him mid-sentence, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message said it was the teacher who called earlier using a burner phone because the administration had already questioned her about warning us. She explained that all staff got an email telling them not to discuss the threat with parents to avoid causing unnecessary panic. She said she couldn't just let us walk into danger without knowing what was happening, even if it cost her job. Mom took screenshots of everything and added them to the growing folder of evidence on her laptop. My phone started blowing up with messages from kids at the school, and most of them weren't supportive at all. Georgia called that afternoon and her voice sounded weird, like she didn't want to be talking to me. She said everyone at the school was saying I wrote the threat myself for attention since my grades were slipping. She said some kids were even betting on whether I'd actually show up when the 72 hours were up. The betrayal hit harder than the actual threat because these were people I'd known since elementary school. People I'd shared lunches with and studied with for tests were now treating me like some attention-seeking liar. I threw my phone across the room and it bounced off the couch cushions while Mom rubbed my back. Detective Carter came back that afternoon with his tablet and asked if he could look through all my social media accounts. I handed over my passwords even though it felt super invasive because I needed them to know I didn't write that threat. He sat at our kitchen table scrolling through years of posts and messages while I watched from across the room. He pulled up the school's security footage on his tablet and showed us how the camera in the math classroom had a huge blind spot. The whiteboard area wasn't visible at all, which meant they couldn't see who wrote the threat. But the hallway camera showed everyone who went in and out of that room during the lunch period when it probably happened. He made a list of 17 students who entered during that time, including Logan, who went in twice. The detective then told us something that made my stomach drop even more. The lock on that classroom door had been broken for weeks according to maintenance records. Anyone could have snuck in during passing periods or lunch without being noticed by the teacher. He started pulling class schedules to figure out who had opportunity to get in there without being seen. About an hour later, the school resource officer showed up at our door in his uniform looking bored. He sat down and immediately started suggesting that maybe I had triggered someone without realizing it. He asked if I'd rejected anyone recently or gotten better grades than someone who expected to be top of the class. Mom stood up and pointed at the door telling him to get out if he wasn't going to take this seriously. She demanded they assign a different officer who actually cared about keeping kids safe instead of blaming victims. The officer left looking annoyed, and Mom called the detective to complain about his dismissive attitude. That evening, while we were eating takeout Chinese food, my phone buzzed with an Instagram message. Someone had sent a photo of their hand covered in red marker stains that were still fresh and visible. The message just said getting warmer, and when I looked closer at the background, I could see our school library's distinctive green carpet and wooden shelves. I showed Mom, and she immediately forwarded it to the detective who said they'd pull the library security footage first thing tomorrow. Mom decided to try calling Bridget to work things out and maybe get her to call off her nephew. She dialed the number and barely got out hello before Bridget hung up on her. We found out later from another parent in our neighborhood that Bridget had been telling everyone Mom attacked her unprovoked at the PTA meeting. She was spreading lies about Mom being violent and unstable, which explained why some parents had been avoiding us. The whole thing was getting messier by the hour, and I couldn't believe how fast everything was spinning out of control. My phone lit up with a text from Georgia saying she needed to tell me something important but couldn't call. She said she'd been in the hallway after lunch and overheard Logan bragging to his friends about teaching someone a lesson. She said he was laughing about how scared I probably was, and how his aunt would be proud of him. Georgia said she was too scared to tell anyone officially, because Logan's friends were pretty rough kids who might come after her. But she wanted me to know what she heard in case it helped catch whoever was doing this to me. The detective showed up early the next morning with his laptop and started going through school records right at our kitchen table. He pulled up Logan's class schedule and pointed at the screen showing Logan had math in that exact room, the period before the threat appeared on the whiteboard. Mom leaned over his shoulder while he clicked through more files and found the attendance records showing Logan was marked present that whole day, with no bathroom passes or nurse visits logged. The detective then opened the photo Georgia had sent me and started looking at something called metadata, which I didn't really understand, but he said it showed when and where photos were taken. His finger traced across the screen to a timestamp showing 2:47 p.m. on Tuesday, and then he pulled up the school's computer lab sign-in sheet from that same day. Logan's name was right there with a login time of 2:45 p.m. and logout at 3:10 p.m., which meant he was on a school computer when someone first posted that whiteboard photo online. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number asking me to meet at the coffee shop on Main Street in an hour because they had important information about the threat. Mom grabbed my phone and showed it to the detective who said we should go, but he'd have an unmarked car watching just in case it was dangerous. We drove to the coffee shop and found the anonymous teacher from the phone call sitting in a back corner booth wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled low. She slid a manila folder across the table containing a class roster with handwriting samples from a recent quiz and pointed to Logan's paper where his capital A looked exactly like the one in the threat on the whiteboard. The teacher said she'd been watching Logan for weeks because of his angry behavior in class, and she'd seen him with red markers multiple times even though students weren't supposed to have them. She left quickly after giving us the folder, and the detective took photos of everything before we headed home, where I tried to convince Mom I should go to the school tomorrow for the last day of the countdown. I told her I didn't want to look scared and that hiding would just make things worse, but she absolutely refused to even consider it. We got into our first real fight since this whole mess started, with her yelling that my safety was more important than my pride, and me yelling back that I couldn't live in fear forever. While we were arguing, my phone started making weird notification sounds, and when I looked at it, someone was trying to airdrop photos to me even though we were at home. The photos kept coming through showing just the number 72 written over and over in red marker on different surfaces like desks and lockers and bathroom stalls. The detective said this was really bad because airdrop only works when someone is within about 30 feet, which meant whoever was sending these was basically right outside our house. He called for backup, and 2 patrol cars showed up within minutes to search the neighborhood, while Mom pulled all the curtains closed and double-checked every lock. They didn't find anyone, but the detective said he'd have a car stationed outside our house all night, and suggested we consider staying somewhere else for a few days. The next morning, the detective called saying he was interviewing Logan at the school with his guardian present and we could watch through video call if we wanted. Logan sat there looking bored while his Aunt Bridget glared at the detective, who asked Logan where he was when the threat was written on the whiteboard. Logan said he was at the nurse's office because he had a headache, but when the detective asked for details, his story kept changing from a headache to stomach problems to feeling dizzy. The detective pulled out the nurse's log showing Logan signed in at 1:15 p.m., but then showed a statement from the previous class's teacher saying the threat was already on the board when she came in at 1:05 p.m. Logan's face went red and he started stammering about maybe getting the times mixed up, while Bridget demanded to know if they were accusing her nephew of anything. The detective kept pushing, and Logan finally admitted he'd lied about being at the nurse but claimed he was just in the bathroom and didn't want to get in trouble for taking too long. Later that afternoon, Mom's phone started blowing up with messages from other parents asking if we were okay and what was going on at the school. The district had sent out an email about taking all threats seriously and increasing security, but didn't mention any specifics, which just made parents more worried and curious. Someone figured out it was about me and posted on the neighborhood Facebook page asking if we were the family causing all this drama at the school. The comments started getting nasty, with people saying we were probably making it up for attention, or that Mom must have done something to deserve this if someone was going after her kid. Georgia texted me a link to an Instagram story from last week that she'd been going through trying to help, and in one of Logan's posts you could see inside his locker. If you looked really close at the corner, there was a red marker cap visible, and in the reflection of his locker mirror, you could see someone in a dark hoodie that looked exactly like what Logan wore to the school that day. I was about to call Georgia to thank her when another text came through that made my stomach drop completely. She said her parents found out she was helping me, and they didn't want her involved in any drama that could affect her college applications next year, so she couldn't talk to me anymore or be seen with me at the school. Reading that message from my best friend saying she was basically abandoning me when I needed her most made everything hit me all at once, and I just sat on my bedroom floor crying harder than I had since this whole nightmare started. Mom found me there about 10 minutes later and pulled me up off the floor, wiping my face with her sleeve and telling me we weren't going to let them win. She made some calls, and by the next afternoon we were sitting in a cramped office downtown with an attorney who kept clicking his pen while he listened to our story. He spread out papers across his desk showing different types of restraining orders we could file against Logan, and maybe even Bridget if we could prove she was involved. The retainer fee alone was $3,000 just to start the process, and Mom's hands shook a little as she wrote the check, but she said protecting me was worth emptying our savings account. While we were there, the detective called saying he'd gotten more security footage from the school and wanted us to see something important. We drove straight to the police station where he had his laptop set up in an interview room with the video paused on a grainy image of the hallway outside my math classroom. He hit play, and we watched Logan walk out of the room at 1:03 p.m. carrying something in his right hand that he kept close to his body like he was trying to hide it. The detective zoomed in and enhanced the image as much as possible, and you could see what looked like the cap of a marker sticking out between his fingers. It wasn't clear enough to prove anything in court, but the detective said it was one more piece of evidence adding up against him. The next morning, the school resource officer showed up at our door saying the administration wanted to meet with us about my safety. We sat in the principal's office while the resource officer suggested maybe I should be suspended for a few days until things calmed down since my presence at the school was causing disruption. Mom stood up so fast her chair fell backward, and she pointed her finger right at the principal's face, saying, "If they punished me for being a victim, she'd have every news station in the state here by lunch." The principal started backtracking immediately, saying that wasn't what they meant, and of course I could continue attending classes with additional security measures in place. 2 days later, I had to go to the police station to give my formal recorded statement, which meant sitting in a small room with a camera pointed at me, while the detective asked me to go through every single detail from the beginning. He made me repeat parts multiple times, asking if I was sure about specific times and exactly what words people used and who was standing where during each conversation. The whole process took almost 4 hours, and by the end my throat was dry from talking, and my head was pounding from trying to remember every tiny detail perfectly. The detective said my statement was crucial for building the case, especially if it went to trial, and Logan's attorney tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding or a joke gone wrong. That same afternoon, the anonymous teacher sent Mom an email with a photo attached, showing an official reprimand letter from the district saying she'd violated protocol by contacting parents directly about a security matter. She wrote that she'd gladly do it again, because keeping students safe was more important than following stupid rules that protected the school's reputation instead of kids. The letter said she was placed on administrative review, which meant they were considering firing her or suspending her teaching license. Mom immediately forwarded it to our attorney, who said it could help our case by showing the school tried to cover up the threat instead of handling it properly. Things got worse that evening when Mom's phone started going crazy with notifications from Facebook. Someone had leaked her police report from the PTA incident to a local parents group, and whoever posted it had edited parts to make it sound like Mom had attacked Bridget without any reason. The comments were brutal, with people calling our house saying Mom was a psycho who deserved whatever was happening, and that I was probably just as crazy as her. One woman left a voicemail saying she hoped someone taught us both a lesson, and another man said we should move out of town before things got worse. The detective came over the next morning with his laptop saying he'd traced the leak back to its source. Someone had used a school district email account to access the police database, which meant it was either a district employee or someone who'd hacked into the system. He showed us the digital trail proving the person had specifically searched for Mom's name and downloaded only her report, not any of the other documents from that incident. This proved someone was actively working to destroy our reputation, while the countdown continued, and the detective said it changed things from a simple threat to a coordinated harassment campaign. He started the process to subpoena the district's email records to find out exactly whose account was used. 3 days later, Bridget finally agreed to meet with Mom for a mediated conversation at the police station. She walked in wearing sunglasses even though we were inside, and sat as far from Mom as possible while the mediator explained the ground rules. Bridget kept her arms crossed at first, but when Mom started talking about how scared I was, and how this had gotten completely out of control, something in Bridget's face changed. She took off her sunglasses, and we could see her eyes were red, like she'd been crying. During the mediation session, Bridget suddenly started sobbing and talking about how humiliated she'd felt after the PTA thing, when everyone saw her get pushed and fall down in front of all those people. She said she'd never felt so small and stupid in her life, and she'd been so angry she couldn't stop talking about it to anyone who would listen, including her nephew. Mom started crying too and apologized over and over, saying she never meant for it to go that far, and she was sorry for letting her temper get the best of her. They actually hugged at the end, which was weird to watch, but the mediator said it was a breakthrough. Bridget wiped her eyes and promised she would talk to Logan immediately about stopping whatever he was planning because she never wanted him to actually hurt anyone. She seemed genuinely shocked when the mediator showed her the evidence we'd gathered and kept saying she just vented to him about being upset, but never told him to do anything like this. We went home after the mediation feeling weird about the whole thing, like maybe this mess could actually get fixed. But around 11 that night, I woke up to this loud splat sound against my bedroom window. I jumped out of bed and peeked through the curtains to see egg yolk sliding down the glass, and then I heard Mom screaming from downstairs. She was standing at the front door staring at our driveway where someone had spray-painted SNITCH in huge red letters across the concrete. The eggs kept hitting the house, one after another, and we could hear people laughing and running away in the dark. Mom called the police while I took pictures of everything with my phone, my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold it steady. The cop who showed up said vandalism cases were hard to solve unless we had witnesses or video, but then our neighbor, Mr. Shimizu, knocked on our door holding his laptop. He'd been watching his security footage after hearing the commotion and caught the whole thing on camera, 2 figures running away after throwing the eggs and spray painting our driveway. One of them was wearing a Letterman jacket with the number 12 on the back, and even in the grainy footage you could see how tall and skinny he was, exactly like Logan, who wore that same jacket every single day. The other person was shorter and kept looking back at our house while they ran, but their face was covered by a hood so we couldn't tell who it was. Detective Carter came over first thing in the morning to look at the footage and said he'd add it to the evidence file, but we needed more than just a jacket and body type to prove it was Logan. That's when my phone buzzed with a text from Georgia saying she was sorry for everything and needed to talk to me. She wrote that she'd been scared of what people would think if she took my side, but she couldn't stay quiet anymore because Logan had been bragging at lunch about teaching me a lesson. She said he'd been showing people pictures on his phone of our vandalized house and laughing about how we deserved worse, and she'd screenshot his messages from their group chat where he was taking credit for everything. Georgia's parents brought her to the police station early on the third morning of the countdown to give an official statement, and she handed over her phone with all the screenshots saved. The messages showed Logan joking about what he'd do when the 72 hours were up, saying things like TikTok and she won't know what hit her, while other kids egged him on with laughing emojis and comments. Detective Carter said this was exactly the evidence they needed to take action, and he called the school right away to inform them about the new developments. The principal finally did something useful, and had Logan removed from the school that morning pending a full investigation, and they put the whole school into something called modified lockdown as a safety measure. We had to show ID to get into the building. All the doors stayed locked during classes, and security guards walked the halls between periods, which made everything feel super serious and scary. Logan's guardian, who turned out to be his grandmother since his parents lived out of state, showed up at the school screaming about lawsuits and civil rights violations. She cornered Mom in the parking lot saying we were ruining Logan's future over a harmless prank, and she'd sue us for defamation and emotional distress if we didn't drop everything immediately. Detective Carter pulled Mom away and warned us that things might get messy legally since Logan's family had money for good lawyers, but he said we had enough evidence to move forward with criminal charges no matter what they threatened. The lab results came back that afternoon showing partial fingerprints on the whiteboard marker that matched Logan's prints from a science project he'd done earlier in the year. Detective Carter explained it wasn't perfect evidence since the prints were smudged, but combined with Georgia's screenshots and the security footage and everything else, it was enough for a judge to sign an arrest warrant. They brought Logan in for questioning that evening, and after 2 hours of denying everything, he finally cracked and admitted he wrote the threat on the whiteboard. He sat there crying and saying he just wanted to scare me because of what Mom did to his Aunt Bridget at the PTA meeting, claiming it was supposed to be a joke, and he never planned to actually hurt anyone. Then he dropped a bomb by saying Tao Yamada was the one who took the picture of the whiteboard and posted it online, which is how it went viral in the first place. They brought Tao in next, and he admitted right away that he thought it would be funny to post the threat for likes and follows. He kept saying he had no idea it would blow up the way it did, or that the police would get involved, and he seemed genuinely sorry about all the trouble he'd caused. The detective made both boys write out full confessions about their roles in everything, from the initial threat to the vandalism to spreading it online, and their parents had to sign papers acknowledging the charges being filed. The next day, the school district sent out this long email apologizing for how they handled the situation and announcing new policies for threat assessment and student safety. They admitted they should have taken the threat seriously from the start instead of trying to keep it quiet, and they promised immediate changes including better security cameras, working door locks, and mandatory threat assessment training for all staff members. The prosecutor called Mom the next morning saying they'd worked out a deal with Bridget's lawyer where Mom could avoid a criminal record if she agreed to a diversion program. Mom had to pay $800 in fines and do 60 hours of community service at the local food bank over the next 3 months. She also had to sign a no-contact order saying she wouldn't go near Bridget at any school events or public places for the next year. The whole thing was humbling for Mom, who kept apologizing to me about how her stupid moment of anger had put me through all this. She started her community service that weekend, getting up at 5 in the morning to help unload trucks at the food bank before her regular work shift. I went with the school counselor 2 days before my return to map out different routes between my classes that would avoid the main hallways where Logan's friends hung out. We picked a spot in the library near the reference desk where I could go if I felt unsafe or needed space during the day. The counselor gave me a special pass that let me leave class 5 minutes early to avoid the crowds between periods. She also arranged for me to eat lunch in the art room with a small group of kids who weren't part of the whole drama. The anonymous teacher who'd warned us got called into the principal's office where they quietly apologized for reprimanding her and told her she was being put on a new student safety committee. She texted Mom from her regular phone saying the administration finally understood that protecting students mattered more than avoiding bad publicity. Georgia started texting me again after a week of silence, sending funny memes at first, then slowly working up to actual conversations. We met at the park near my house where she cried and said she'd been terrified of becoming a target herself, but knew she'd been a coward. I told her I understood being scared, and that she'd come through when it really mattered by giving the police those screenshots. We agreed to new rules about our friendship where she wouldn't share my personal stuff with anyone, and I wouldn't put her in positions where she had to choose sides. The principal called Mom saying the school wanted to offer a restorative justice circle where Logan and Tao could apologize to me directly with a mediator present. I thought about it for 2 days before agreeing to a 30-minute session with Mom and the counselor there for support. Logan showed up looking smaller than I remembered, his grandmother making him wear a button-up shirt instead of his usual hoodie. He read from a paper where he admitted he'd let his anger about his aunt turn into something dangerous and wrong. Tao went next, his voice shaking as he explained how he'd thought getting internet fame would make him popular, but instead it had nearly ruined multiple lives. They both had to explain what they'd learned and how they planned to make better choices going forward. I didn't forgive them exactly, but I told them I appreciated them taking responsibility for what they'd done. My first day back at the school felt like walking through a movie set where everything looked the same but felt completely different. Most kids nodded at me in the halls or gave me small smiles of support, though a few of Logan's friends turned away when they saw me coming. The safety plan worked better than I expected with teachers stationed at key points between classes, and the counselor checking in with me twice a day. My new lunch spot in the art room turned out to be way better than the cafeteria, with a group of quiet kids who talked about movies and books instead of gossip. Mom started seeing a therapist every Tuesday to work on what she called her anger management issues. She came home from her first session with homework about identifying triggers and practicing breathing exercises when she felt her temper rising. Our family sat down that weekend for what Mom called an honesty meeting, where we talked about keeping secrets and how her hiding the PTA incident had made everything worse. We made new rules about telling each other about any problems right away, and set limits on social media where we all agreed to stay off Facebook and Instagram for at least 3 months. Dad flew home early from his business trip and said he was cutting back on travel, so he could be around more for both of us. The math classroom where everything started got a deep cleaning over the weekend, with the janitor using special chemicals to remove every trace of red marker from the whiteboard. The broken lock that had been taped over for months finally got replaced with a heavy-duty one that clicked loudly when it engaged. I walked past that room on my first day back, stopping for just a second to look through the window at the clean whiteboard covered in new equations. The threat was gone, and everyone who needed to face consequences had started that process, though I knew the memory would stick with me for a long time. Well, that's gonna wrap it up for me today. Kinda makes you stop and think about things, huh? Appreciate you hanging out and wondering through it all with me. Subscribe for more content like this.